to take a little more time today and give you a little more insight into layout design. So I provided you all with this start document. Let me go back here. I was working on it and then I needed to make an edit. So you all have something that looks like this that you can download and start using. This body copy is the body copy that Converge Magazine uses. And if you guys want to go into your stories or any copy that you find and you select it all, and you can come in here and you can actually paste it right in here and it'll automatically be that same font and style that you want. From there, you'll need to make edits depending on your story. Now, I have this set up as a 6 column. That's really too small for most of these stories. So if you want to make changes, you go up to layout, margin, columns, and you change this to 3. Because these should really be double. And that way, when you click here, well, that was wrong. Hold on. Okay, let me lock and turn this layer off and see. Let me go back. I have this text here. There's too much of it. And then it will roll over automatically into these columns for me just by clicking on this red add. Now, I just copied and pasted in the whole Word document. I'm going to delete the headline right now and just focus on the body copy. This story in particular is very long. Some of you might need to roll your stories over into an extra page or two. But for now, really focus on doing a really nice 2-page spread, and then we can always talk to Converge or the magazine about doing those extra pages and how many pages were allotted. But really focus on getting a beautiful spread to introduce the whole story. This body copy comes in without any breaks between the paragraphs, so you can select all and you can add those in these settings up here. So see, as I change this, this is a space after each paragraph. It adds a little space in there and breaks it for me. A couple things you guys want to consider. Some of these stories have things like times. They have things like quotes. This one has a lot of great first person narrative. Think about the way the type is going to be the most readable, the most legible, easily conveyed. You might want to do things like make the times or these subheadlines bold. You might even want to change that font. Or in this case, you might want to do something that's different altogether to really call attention to that, something that fits with the overall aesthetic of your story. And then you might want to do things like not have a return space. So a couple things to consider when doing body copy. Look for your subheadlines, make those stand out. Avoid widows. See this word here, this word here. Those words that are all alone on there can sometimes be distracting. When you have such a long story like this one goes on for multiple pages. I'm not going to expect you guys to have perfect body copy typography and get rid of every error like that, but I want you guys to be aware of how it flows. A couple tricks if you really want to get rid of these widows is to play with the spacing. See right here, this is just the space between the words, and you can just bump this paragraph up, give a little space, and then it gets rid of that for you. You just want to be cautious. You don't want to do this significantly so that it looks different than every other paragraph, but sometimes one little bump can get rid of that widow without causing too much of a distraction in the rest of your type. I always like to do left justified for body copy. Sometimes people do prefer to make their columns justified entirely. I think these rivers, you can see right here, the rivers in between some of these paragraphs gets a little bit distracting, so it's not really my favorite way to do it, but everybody's layout's going to be different depending on their style, so you guys can really experiment with that. I showed you in a previous video how to do text wraps, so pay attention to that if you want to add your images in that way. And I just want to talk a little bit about how to look at these images, how to process them, and how to think about using them in creative ways. So I have downloaded, let's see here. I have downloaded just a few of the photos that were provided to us, and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about how to think about using these in creative ways. I have also gone through and made a Pinterest board. I can share the link with you of just some layouts that really grabbed my attention that I like. You'll see there's illustrative ones as well as photo-driven ones. And there's all different ways, but really the key thing here is I want you guys to think about creating an anchor and then using grids. Grids are going to be your best friend. This one right here has a photo to anchor the whole thing, and then the sub information is a grid. This is a grid, has 4 illustrations here and then 4 paragraphs of text, but really what you're seeing here is a grid. This loose layout style gives it less rigid feeling like some traditional grids would, but it's still a grid concept. You can also do something like this where it flows really organically, but think about movement, think about hierarchy and how you want this info to break apart on the page. I really encourage you all to go to Pinterest or whatever, even just Google search some different layout options. And if you see something that really inspires you and you want help on how to execute that, you can always come back and ask me. This one also has a really creative use of laying out the photos. This has a lot of open white space. Some of you have a lot of words, so you don't have as much liberty there. But think about layering the photos on top of each other, layering your text. In different ways you can do things like that. It doesn't have to be just photos plopped on a page. You guys can get really creative. This one uses one big illustration to span across the page and then these paragraphs. There are so many different options. A lot of you have articles that provide a lot of photos. You can think about unifying them through black and white. You can think about creating a grid. Pull out that key photo that you think makes the best feature image to stand out, and then work from there on what tells the story best. You guys have to read these stories. You have to figure out what works best for them, and then really explore some of your options. This is another really great grid option using illustration. This one uses illustration and then has a lot of body copy. This one unifies everything through color. Just the possibilities are endless, but I want you guys to start thinking about doing these things in creative ways. So if I go back to these photos, those of you who have photos to work with, I want you to think about how to use these photos. And I just pulled a couple. For example, this article about the twins. I mean, twins are a super interesting visual. They even wore matching outfits and matching hair, but they're in this setting that really doesn't look interesting and appealing. So feel free to take liberty to make these photos your own piece of art. If you wanted to clip them out from the background, my first instinct to do this would even be to make my own illustration or photo illustration out of them. And I'm going to do this really quickly. But you could do something like copying their faces. And I'm just doing this really quickly with the lasso. If you were doing this for an assignment, I would want you to use the pen tool, do this really neat and clean, but I'm just going to show you a quick example. So what I did was use the lasso and I copied and pasted from this background layer onto 2 new layers. And then you could do something where you brought their faces closer together. You could play around with the opacity. And then I always like to, when I'm playing with opacity, I add a white background just so I can actually see what I'm working with a little better. But if you see where I'm going here, you could really make your own style of art. You could bring their faces in closer together. You could really unify these in a lot of different ways. They have such interesting features with the flowers. I just want you to think outside the box, maybe not necessarily using every image exactly how it is, but turning it into something that could really be your own. This is a great photo of the person in this article, and then there's also this photo here. To me, this photo is more interesting because you see more of what he's got in his background, but then I think this is a really nice portrait. So you'd have to make that decision on which one to use. I would probably use this one as a feature image, and something like this, I want you guys to think about how you crop and how you place it onto your article. So I always like to make sure that any horizontal lines are straightened. So if you go to your crop tool, you can rotate that and straighten up these lines. And then I would really get rid of all of this distracting stuff at the bottom that doesn't help tell the story. So I would maybe crop this one right about here if I was going to use it in my story. That way you still have all these Barbies, but you don't have these cords and this floor and things that aren't necessarily important to the image. But this one's also nice. He's connecting to the camera. He's looking right at you, and you still see some of these things in there. This image, I wanted you guys to, again, think about processing these images in a way that works best for you. Here's a quick technique. I would definitely go to levels for this one, and I would bump up that black and give it a little bit more saturation. You can tell that he just has a piece of cardboard behind here. So if you use your levels, you can give that a little bit more. You could even clip out these Barbies and use them in an interesting way. Or if you want to combine illustration and photography, you're welcome to do that. These two, actually I pulled 3 images from the fire truck story. If you guys look at this folder for the fire truck story, as well as some of the other stories, some of them have a lot of images, yet there's not one image that may feel like the feature image or the main image. You can do things like this where you extend a photo, and then you can select, this one's really easy because it has that bright blue color, and you can do something like this. So let me do that again for you. Here's the image. I would actually start by making the background layer 0, and then I would take my crop tool and I would just extend the top of this image. And then the easiest way to do it really would just be to pull a color and then fill that color. But you can see here, it's not a smooth transition. You could also select that Edit Content Aware Fill and see how good that does for you. And that actually looks a lot better, so that's the way to do it. You never know how these things are going to turn out. That's perfect. So then I would save this. And I would just label it Edit, so I know that's the one I edited. You could save it as a Photoshop file if you're going to come back and change it. Otherwise, just a JPEG. And now when you go to your InDesign document, I'm going to delete these columns. You have something that feels much more like a feature. You could even put some of the text over the top of that and use that as a background color. Or this could just be a nice lead-in, and you could use this whole space for a headline over here. You could do a headline, you could do a subheadline, and then it could lead into the story. This story in particular, like I mentioned, has a lot of photos, but not a lot of great feature images. This is one of the images from the firefighter story. So this picture of this burger and food does not look appetizing. It does not look great, but if you read the story, it's part of the story in there somewhere. So this is where you guys have to start thinking about grids, combining photos in a meaningful way. This photo is another photo I pulled because you could also do the sky technique on here if you needed more room. So if I were designing the firefighter image story, I would probably even think about using a grid and layering multiple photos together in order to convey the message, but not give one photo all the weight to carry because it doesn't necessarily have a good an interesting, not every photo is visually appealing on its own, but together they all tell a story. So if these were photos I dropped in, I could put 3 in here. I could even do something where I used 3 photos along the bottom here. Just think about doing things in terms of a grid. Give yourself anchors, give yourself focal points, and give yourselves hierarchy when you're creating these. Now, another thing to think about, I just kind of did this instinctually as I was giving you an example. Don't do things here like, for example, you want all your columns to line up. So a couple things to avoid. 2 sentences like this is fine. If this ended with 1 sentence, you would want to roll that all the way over. And then you would want these to be even, or as even as possible. So you don't want to do things where you have 1 sentence that's left hanging off on its own. So again, this one, if I rolled this over and I had these all as justified as possible, that looks pretty nice. And then this text right here would just carry on to probably my next page. You can also do things where, see how the end of these is all different sizes, yet the text kind of lines up optically. You can go to type, no, it is object, text frame options. Top is what I usually do, but you can also justify these. And that way, when you pull these down, it's justifying the paragraphs for you with the spacing this way so that they're all lined up. So explore those options. You guys you have all the control you want within the characters, the paragraph settings, and then type and object. That's where you control your body copy, is from in there. So I hope that helps you kind of see some different ways you can lay out these stories. Again, this could be a huge headline. I forgot what the headline was to the story. Finding family through flames. The headlines are where I want you guys to really have fun with this and give it your own artistic element. But again, think about being appropriate and think about how it fits along with the story. I have so many fonts on here. I'm not even sure which one would fit with the story. I'm just going to pick one. I'm not saying that this is the best one. I just want to give you guys an example of things you can do. But you could use this whole space as a headline if you wanted to. Don't forget to add, because this is for a magazine, so don't forget to add things like written by, or look at the past Converge and see how this was done. And then there should also be a photo credit that you could add here. This article in particular also has references. So these do not have to be a significant part of your article. You can make these very subtle, very small. You can go down to 8-point or possibly even 7-point if you want to. Pay attention to how things get copied in from Word. Let me backtrack for you for a second and zoom in here so you can see, because I already scaled this down. But you will see here that when I pasted this in from Word, because it was numbered, it has these huge spaces. So I just delete those and add my own space. And then let's say, for example, this was my entire story, and I just wanted these references to go here along the bottom. I do not have to leave them like this. This is up to you in your design. So I could do something like this. And just have them all run small here along the bottom. But they're there. They're there for people to see. but it is not a significant portion of the design. It doesn't need a lot of attention, but it needs to be there for information. Something like this could even go down here because this is a clean space, unobstructed. You could add paragraphs and start the story over here if you wanted to do that as well. So just lots of different techniques to think about. You'll see when I drag that over, if I unback, it's behind this image that I added in. Don't forget to use your layers. One of the things you guys wanted to know about Project 6 is how to add backgrounds. You do that the same way you would add a background photo. So I dropped this photo in. I would want to add it to its own layer and then pull it behind everything else. And then I lock that layer so it doesn't get in my way. But then if I wanted to make changes, I can always go back to it. Adding a background color would be very much the same way, where you would use the shape tool and you'd get a square. And then you would do it on its own layer. And you pick your color. And then you could lock it, and now you have a background color. And you just work over the top of that. If you decided that color wasn't the color for you, you just unlock that layer, you go back to swatches, and you change the color. You can change the colors in these swatches by double clicking on them. And then you can change them this way by using these toggles. You can enter your exact colors that you want to match if you know what that is, and you can even change it to RGB. Because we're working digitally now, you're welcome to use RGB or CMYK. Just keep in mind when we actually print that you'll need to convert so that the colors look like what we are expecting them to see. So I'm going to delete that. And let me go back to Photoshop. Stories like this dog story also has a lot of really great images. This is an image I think would make a great feature image because the dog is making eye contact. I think that looks really great. Again, you have things like this door and this furniture and elements that are really distracting. So if I was using this in my story, again, I would crop it. And for example, you don't even have to do this photo editing in Photoshop. You could do this within InDesign once you're figuring out where your story is going to be. So if I brought this photo into InDesign and I had it span my two columns, delete some of that. I'm going to delete the fire truck. We're going to switch gears for a moment. Now I think this would be a great feature image. I could pull the edges of this over and crop it right in InDesign, and that way I'm not altering the original photo, but it just gives it a cleaner look automatically. And then if I want this to be my main feature image to carry the page, I can scale it so it fits within these columns. I could add my headline here. I could make my headline cut across the page like some of these examples. Let me see, which one am I looking for? I saw one earlier where the headline cuts into the photos. Or like, see, this one has a really unique treatment. If you see something like this and you want me to show you how to do it, I can show you guys how to do things like that. Yeah, this one has the headline over the photo. That works really well. Just be aware of grids and breaking things apart and how to do things to make them really dynamic. I think it might have been in the PowerPoint, but regardless, what I was thinking of, I forgot the headline of this story, so we're just going to use this headline. You can do something where the headline cuts in and it goes across the page like this. You want to be aware of where your gutter is so that the words don't get cut off, but you could do something like this where the headline leads you in here. and then takes you through. You could even make this section, because it might be confusing to have a headline here and then copy here and here. You could use this section to add more photos and a caption. And then you could start your body copy here. Again, endless possibilities, endless opportunities to make this your own. I just want you guys to think about how to use these elements in creative ways and do some really good work. So again, take a look at different layout options. Really explore what's given to you in these folders. This is another folder that has so many images, but a lot of the images here don't function properly as a standalone image. They all need to be grouped together to really convey the whole story. So think about grids. Think about using a key image, an anchor image, add text to the top, use photography techniques. What I did to this image was really not very helpful. So what I was trying to show you here is that you can clip things out, you can move them together, you can make them your own piece of art. You can do things like they're far apart. You want to bring them closer together. You can illustrate. You can use these as sources of illustration and starting points for that. That would be the same when I looked at a lot of these Barbie photos. If you wanted to illustrate something or pull out a pattern, you can do that. Look for what makes each of these interesting. I think that the fact that they're twins, the fact that they mirror each other, and that they're dressed the same, they have interesting elements and features going on here. So for example, if I was pulling this image over, and there are a lot more images in this folder for these two. Even if you didn't want to get into doing a complex photo illustration of these, think about how they could be more appealing. Same image, and just with a little cropping and framing, you could do something like this that brings their faces close together and shows that duplication, that mirroring of each other. Again, also look for the most flattering photos of people. She's blinking a little bit in this photo, but I do like that you get both of their profiles. That makes it really interesting. So that is it for today. Please let me know if you want specific tutorial questions. Oh, one more thing I do want to discuss, you guys. Do you all know how to convert a photo to black and white? You can either go grayscale and discard your color image, or another useful tool is to use the channel mixer, and you can hit monochromatic, and then you have more control over what parts of the photo are turning black and white to give it more depth. Sometimes if you just convert to grayscale, it's a little bit flat, so this gives you more options. Converting photos to black and white is a great way to unify images, and in InDesign you can go through and let me file, save as. Then you can do things like with your shape tools. Say you want to unify this with any kind of color swatches. You'll see a similar technique over here on this Pinterest board, how there are bars of color going over some of these things. You can do that in InDesign, and then go over to effects and just play with the opacity. So if you want to unify these photos in any kind of way, think about doing stuff like this, where you use color bars And then this would be great space to do a pull quote if you had one. There you go. Just some more techniques, more ideas for layout, and I can't wait to see what you guys come up with. And I'm here if you have any questions. Okay, thanks.